GDP per capita of about $2,000 per person. Although, as is said here, it's not evenly distributed. You have a situation whereby, it's skewed there. It's a market that is too large to ignore, which is why, how come you're seeing more and more international brands coming into Nigeria. So it's a question of a trickle-down effect, which with time would happen. I'm not saying that everything would happen in 2013 and going forward, but it's something that maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but but you cannot have
not a bad thing.
You cannot have a size of 160 million people, which is probably about 40% of the population of the entire West Africa. I mean, I travel a lot within West Africa, and when you do that, when you see the sort of informal trade, because a lot of what we're talking about in terms of statistics is the formal the statistic. We haven't even got into the informal trade that happens between Nigeria and every country all the way to Senegal, which is not recorded. At the end of the day, they're Nigerians doing these businesses. Also, other countries like Central Africa. So it's the trickle down, and I think it will take time. That's my view.
In speaking, both of you referred to the petrodollars. Most of our money is coming from our oil. But the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister is quoted as saying that most of the growth took place in the non-oil sectors of the economy. I'd like you to please explain that to us.
Yes, I will explain that. When you talk in percentage terms, I mean, let's look at this. Let's look at the size of the GDP. Even though crude oil accounts for 95% of our foreign exchange earnings and 70% of government income, but in terms of the number as it adds up, agric accounts for 42% of our GDP, agriculture alone. And then when you talk about distributive trade and commerce, it's also fairly sizable. So in the last 3, 4, 5 years, the growth drivers had always been non-oil. But then, in terms of the amount, in terms of the naira inflow, of course, petroleum is still the major thing. But it's large, the base is large, but in terms of the incremental things we're getting now, we're getting them in the non-oil area, which is why FOLUKE said, look, this rebalancing of a sort, diversification will come, but of course we came this far. Over 40 years, it's not going to take 1 year or two for us to get there. So long as we keep our eye on the ball and we begin to look at the real sector, we begin to divert resources into opening up those areas, we remove the structural factors that impede growth. Over time, we're going to see a lot more. I mean, the economy will definitely be rebalanced. Perhaps maybe in the next decade or two, as we begin to see growth more in those areas. Yeah, so you're going to see a fairly balanced economy if we remain consistent in looking at those growth drivers, which is why I'm glad, personally, that the growth drivers are actually in the core areas where we have competitive advantage, as opposed to crude oil that will, I mean, we're told by scientists that within the next 40 years it will disappear.
There's a lot of renewable energy, and the finds in the US and other places. So at the end of the day,
the area of manufacturing, Mr. BOYO, I was watching the news yesterday and I heard the MD of Mr. Putu, talking about buying Nigerian, if more Nigerians bought things that are made in Nigeria. But I then asked myself, how many things are made in Nigeria that they want us to buy? What has happened to the manufacturing sector, and how can we bring it back to life to make its own contribution to this economy we're talking about?
Well, I think the reality, of course, is that there's always been a divergence between what government says it wants to do and the reality. I mean, you know, we are all used to this. Regrettably, the promises we have been having, and we're still being fed now, are the same promises we were fed 30 years ago. That, oh, the economy will improve, it will this, it will that, it will do that, you know. But it's evident that instead of getting better, we've been getting poorer. I mean, so if we are now being told, have patience, another 10, 20 years, we'll be dead. The reality, of course, is that the fundamentals are wrong. We have to be, I said earlier, and I said it with all seriousness, that these people have been getting away with murder for so long, in the sense that you cannot overtly, openly have mismanaged wealth in such a manner that you are better off when you own less money. It doesn't, there's no rationale, there's no reason for it, such that you have a framework where you are getting poorer and poorer as you earn more income. The manufacturing sector has been crying for decades that interest rates must come down. Don't tell me that interest rate is not the only thing that contributes to drive any economy. Go to those economies that you are trying to imitate and go and check how much the manufacturers there are getting funds for. Don't let's deceive ourselves. When we quote one statistics to support ourselves and bring statistics from other places, we must also consider the realities in those countries we're talking about. Those countries don't borrow. The manufacturers there don't borrow at 22% or 23%. In those countries, the central bank does not give money and push money into the banks and go back and borrow it the next day at 12%. I said these people have been getting away with murder.
Okay, now I think to some extent I remember some government officials saying that we should not get too emotional about things. Let's be a bit dispassionate. And let's ask the CBN Deputy Governor, Mr. LEMO, what's your thought on the mopping up of liquidity within the economy as being presented? Because I know Mr. Henry BOYO is passionate about this. He's said it a number of times on channels and other platforms. What's your thought? What's the position of the CBN?
Well, that has been his very popular cliche. The other side of Mr. BOYO today is mopping up, why central bank should mop up. So, I think we all know him to have that very strong view. Sometimes he gets even emotional about it. But the truth of the matter is this. But before I go into that, let me correct him on one or two things. I don't think it's right for us to begin to say that things are getting bad, Nigerians are getting poorer. We can be corrected. Even the per capita income that FOLUKE talked about, there has been improvement in the last 5-6 years. That we should do. We should acknowledge. I mean, the problem with us in Nigeria is that, yes, it's good to criticize ourselves. It's good to point at things that we need to do better. But I think when we begin to get so pessimistic that we begin to get very, very, I mean, nothing good happens here. I think it's also like swinging to the other end of the pendulum. Now, coming back to the issue of liquidity that he's been talking about, I just don't understand what his views are, because now central bank is defined in our act that central bank is the custodian of foreign exchange earnings of government, and it's defined in the constitution that the naira shall be the currency for transaction in Nigeria. And so, like I said earlier, 95% of government foreign exchange earning comes from petrodollars. And the constitution says when these revenues come, they must be shared in a particular manner before they are spent. Now, he wants me to go and give 774 local government people, 36 states plus Abuja and the federal government, and share dollars to them so that I don't push money out. But when you look at funds flow, all we do is that when this money is earned in dollars, we monetize it by releasing naira to them, and we keep that dollar to defend the foreign exchange, because people come, of course, to import every week, and that is what we sell. So eventually, of course, they will demand for this dollar, and then, of course, so that dollar will flow out into commerce and so on and so forth. And he mentioned 20-something months of import. Today, our reserve level is $44.3 billion. It's just barely sufficient to do 6-7 months of import. This economy has grown, and so the import requirement is also very large. All we do is I will release naira to them. I remember even there was a time during Soludo days when we even conceived of what he was suggesting. And of course, the government came and said, no, you can't give us dollars. Constitutionally, we are expected to spend naira here. And so, of course, central bank then had to, they say, okay, we will hold on to it. After all, it's also our duty to defend the value of the naira. Defending the value of the naira means, of course, we must have a dollar pool that will ensure that